listening to a Downright Creepy original on the Crickets Podcast Network.
Welcome to That's Strange, where we dive deep into the internet, uncovering anything we think is weird, strange, controversial, or makes you think. I'm one of your hosts, Alex, joined as always with Chad and Ryan. On this week's Season 3 finale, we are diving into John Wayne Gacy, from his rough upbringing to the monster he eventually became.
Before we get too far into the topic, which is a crazy one that we decided to record on Easter because we're weird, we just wanted to remind you to head on over to thatstrange.net, where you'll find links to all of the important things that have to do with us, including our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook group, all the things. There's so much stuff, and we're just getting started. So definitely head on over there. Make sure to give us a follow, and you'll be the first to hear of all of the wonderful things that Chad is doing, because Chad is the one that keeps this show together, as we found out in a previous episode. Thank you, Chad.
You're welcome, buddy. So I kind of talked to Al, and I've said on this show before that I'm really into serial killers. And that was, I think, when we were talking about the Night Stalker that I had never heard of, right?
Chad hates cereal.
And I also...
Yeah, he does want to kill cereal, that's true.
I also told Alex last night that I have never heard of John Wayne Gacy. So it turns out... turns out that I'm actually not into serial killers, apparently. Because those are two...
real quick?
Yeah.
I'm blown away by that.
You said you told me something last night, and then Ryan just now said he was blown away by it. We work together. It's not weird.
Or maybe it is. We don't know.
Okay?
That's true.
I did something last night because that was...
Right. Sorry, let me clarify that.
While I was laying in bed with Alex, I told him...
While we were having breakfast in bed together. So I'm shocked. You don't know.
Yeah.
You didn't know about John Wayne Gacy. That's...
I mean, I think that I came across him, maybe like pictures of him dressed as a clown and that kind of stuff. But as far as the full story, no, don't remember reading it whatsoever. But
that's wild. I never would have guessed it. For me, John Wayne Gacy is up there with some of the ones like Jeffrey Dahmer that I feel like everyone just knows about. Or any of those higher up names, the ones that just everyone is aware of, right? I just feel like this one's that in that category. So I'm just shocked. I can't believe you've never heard of it.
Yeah,
that blows me away. Anyway,
it happens.
We can move on from there.
So John Wayne Gacy was born in March of 1942. He was born to a small family in Chicago. His father was a mechanic and also a World War I vet, while his mother took care of the children. Gacy had two sisters, one younger, one older, and throughout his childhood, he was close to both sisters and his mother. However, he had a pretty rough relationship with his father, and it seems like anytime that we talk about serial killers, or if you read about serial killers, this seems to be something that comes up a lot. Abusive, drunk father, that kind of stuff. So it's not shocking. But
no.
Unfortunate, but yeah, it's one of those things you kind of expect it at this point, but yeah, I agree with you. It's sad, but it definitely seems to coincide with these types of stories, unfortunately.
Right. So his father was a alcoholic, obviously abusive. He would belittle him, call him names, and put him in competition with his sisters. Gacy often was physically abused by his father too, being beaten for menial mistakes that every child makes. Although he was abused by his father, this did not change the young boy's perception of his father, which it rarely does, right? I mean, most of these kids that are abused, they still love their father.
I think it almost makes them want their father's affection even more, right?
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So he stated in interviews that he loved his father, and he felt that he was never good enough in his eyes, which is understandable, right? In 1949, Gacy and a friend were accused of sexually fondling a young girl. Upon learning of this, Gacy's father whipped him with a razor strop. I could go both ways on this. What do you guys think?
I'm going to go with a razor A razor
Stripe.
a fruit stripe gum.
It's spelled strope, but I think it's strop.
It is. Maybe.
So anyway, it's a leather belt, essentially.
It's a belt. Right.
So razor belt. Ooh, that does not.
Well, no, not a razor belt. It's a leather strap used to sharpen a razor that somewhat looks like a belt.
Oh, got it. Got it. That makes more sense to me now. Yes. So it's one of those things like a hair cutter person.
Yes.
A barber uses.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hair cutter person.
Straight razor. Yes.
The definition of barber is a hair cutter person. Yeah.
It's a hair cutter person. Look, Mom.
So in the same year that happened, 1949, Gacy was sexually molested multiple times by a family friend and contractor. He was often abused in the man's work truck, and Gacy was obviously too fearful to tell his father, fearing his father would blame it on Gacy himself, which is understandable. So right out of the gate, we have the making of a serial killer when he's very young. Like if you look at, like I said earlier, if you look at it, majority of serial killers have this kind of background as a child. Am I wrong?
No, it's pretty typical. I mean, everything is it's almost. I mean, it's kind of expected that something like this would line up. You know, the origins being the same, and growing up with an abusive mother or father, and having a dysfunctional childhood in general is pretty common for something like this. So, hey, real quick before we move on, I just wanted to say thank you everybody who's watching through Panic Fest. We are so glad and fortunate to be a part of this. Thank you to Downright Creepy, who obviously gave us this opportunity in the first place, as well as Crickets Podcast Network. And thanks to Tim, Casey Canton, and everybody involved that made this possible. And shout out to all the other shows and the indie films and all that. They're going to be a part of it. This has all been put together so well, and I'm really looking forward to. This is pre-recorded, so that way you guys can have video on demand, and so I'm really looking forward to seeing it all. So.
And if you like our show, chances are you'll love the other shows, because we're not even that good. So
yeah.
So I mean, definitely go check out the other ones if you liked this one, because it only goes uphill from here.
Definitely. I feel like I say it on every blog post, but if you like our podcast, Downright Creepy is where you need to be, because it's all this kind of stuff. So
absolutely,
completely agree.
So, adding to the abusive relationship with his father, the sexual assaults that he got, he also grew up as an overweight child. He was diagnosed with a heart condition. Sorry. He avoided most physical activities, including sports, because of that heart condition. Once Gacy hit 5th grade, he began experiencing blackouts. He was hospitalized on several occasions due to these blackouts. And he was also hospitalized for a burst appendix, not really relevant, but however, Gacy's father didn't buy the tales of these blackouts, and he actually confronted him while the boy was sleeping in the hospital, or staying in the hospital, that he didn't believe him. The family, the sisters, the mom, they all believed the blackouts, the episodes he was having. However, it was never definitively diagnosed. Now, when Alex and I watched the documentary, what did he say on the documentary? Like when he had a seizure, he had like 80 times strength of a normal man or something ridiculous.
So, yeah, that was crazy.
The dude is, first of all, the dude is so like into himself. It's hilarious to watch. And it's also, again, it makes perfect sense. It's right in line with the, like being a sociopath and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, he was like the doctor said that when I had seizures, I had 80 times my own human strength.
Yeah.
And me and Chad just looked at each other and we're like, what? That
doesn't
makes
no
make
sense.
any sense. Due to an epileptic seizure.
Yeah, I had 80 times this, right? Like he's a superhero. He's a Marvel superhero. Gets seizures. Okay. So friends in high school would often witness Gacy's father abusing Gacy. He would rarely provoke his father. I mean, even the sister said that like when their dad went downstairs to drink, he came up a totally different person. So according to family and friends that witnessed the abuse, they said that Gacy rarely fought back against his father. And usually the mother was the one that would step in, which would lead to even more name calling for Gacy, calling him a mama's boy and a, wimp and all that stuff. So, like we said, Gacy had a pretty rough childhood, and it's lining up for the things that are going to come later in this episode that we're going to talk about. The product of an abusive home, sexual assaults, and living in the shadow of his alcoholic father. So, post-childhood. In the 1960s, at age 18, Gacy started to get involved with the local politics, working as an assistant for the Democratic Party. So this led to even more disgust from his father, who just called him a patsy. And, I would imagine that his father was not a Democrat, and that's why he was getting these kind of responses from him. But even at 18, Gacy's father still was imposing his will on the boy. He bought his son a car, which sounds nice, but he also used that car to punish him. He would take the keys away, and he even went as far to take parts off the car so it wouldn't start. Okay. So
that's an extra step. That's an extra level.
I mean, right.
Yeah.
I just thought of The Shining and watching like Jack Torrance took all the spark plugs from the snowcat. That's just what it reminded me of. Of course, horror movie. Yeah. Right. What do you expect?
Right. You should know that from Ryan by now. So he would take these parts off the car, and the last time that he did it, he put the car back together for Gacy, and Gacy decided to use that as his escape. So he left Chicago and ventured out to Las Vegas. He initially worked as an ambulance service before being transferred to a mortuary, working for them for 3 months while also living in the mortuary. Now, this next part, I'm going to say it because it was said at one point by him and then declined later. But that is like right in line with everything that he says. He eventually declines later. Yeah. So he confessed that while being alone at the mortuary one night, he climbed into the coffin of a deceased teenager, cuddling and rubbing the dead body before going into a state of shock. Now, he says that that's a wild story. There's no way. I never did anything like that. But in the documentary, he's like, plus the people that are living are the ones you got to be concerned about. Like, it's just trying to make it be like, it's totally normal,
It's really not that big of a deal.
It's not that
like
big.
I mean, like, when you think about it, like, in reality, like, he's not going to complain, right? So, I mean, come on. Like, there's no family to sue me, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
So the incident, that incident allegedly causes him to rethink his venture out to the desert in Las Vegas, calls his mother and asks for his father's permission to come back home, and his father agrees. 1964, he meets his first wife. They become engaged in September of that same year. Gacy also joined the local JCs, and he worked tirelessly for this organization. Or we'll get into a little bit more of what they were about, at least this charter of the JCs. I don't know. Is that what you call it? A charter?
I think so. Chapter, maybe. I don't know.
So his wife, Marilyn Myers, her father would eventually go on to purchase 3 KFC restaurants in Waterloo, Iowa. The couple would move to Iowa so that Gacy could manage the restaurants. Couple would go on to have a child, and when Gacy's father visited in 1966, he privately apologized to Gacy for the physical and emotional abuse, saying, "I was, quote, wrong about you, son." So it's always shocking when you hear about like a abusive father apologizing, because that's very rare, and that must mean that it was pretty bad that he even noticed, like, I need to apologize to, so I don't know. What do you guys think of this childhood so far?
I mean, it's definitely dark. Like we kind of already said, like, I would expect it with where the story goes, But I mean, it's definitely like, it's obviously abusive. It almost feels like the dad was very manipulative, which tracks with who John Wayne Gacy became. And I kind of like, I doubt whether or not this apology, like, I mean, frankly, if this apology even happened, because let's put aside like how much of a liar John Wayne Gacy is.
True.
I mean, it almost seems like it was a manipulative, I'm going to try to get on your good side because you're doing things that get you more power or something. Like, it almost feels like that. It's like manipulation.
It does kind of, yeah, you're right. That's a good point.
So at the time, the Waterloo JCs, which Gary became deeply involved with when he moved there and served on the board of directors, was also heavily involved in prostitution, pornography, and drug use, using stag films to greatly increase interest in the group as well as membership to the group. Gacy was also known to make sexual advances towards young men who worked for him at KFC or that he had met through the JC. If Gacy was ever confronted for this inappropriate behavior, he would laugh it off as a joke. He's just joking around, So in 1967, Gacy sexually assaulted 15-year-old Donald Voorhees. And this seems to be, outside of the episode that happened when he was younger, fondling the little girl, this seems to be the first reported criminal activity, or at least that he got caught for, I should say. Donald Voorhees was a son of a fellow JC. Gacy was accused of luring Donald to his house under the promise to show him the stag films that were regularly shown at the JC events. Gacy gave the boy alcohol, allowed him to watch the stag films before talking him into oral sex and stating, quote, "You have to have sex with a man before you can have sex with a female," unquote.
Not sure that logic checks out.
Not really, no.
Yeah.
No,
I don't think it does.
So over the next several months, Gacy similarly allegedly abused several other youths. Gacy also persuaded one of his employees to physically assault Voorhees. So Voorhees went to the police, obviously, to tell him about what happened with Gacy. And Gacy sends a man to beat him up, to stop him from testifying. So the man actually, Voorhees gets away from the attack and reports the guy to the police, who is arrested. And at first, he denies any tie to Gacy. He denies that he was even at the incident in question. Eventually, he confesses that he was requested by Gacy to carry out the assault. So Gacy was ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation at the University of Iowa, where two doctors over the course of 17 days examined Gacy before diagnosing him with a, quote, antisocial personality disorder, which is the clinical term for a sociopath or a psychopath. So, what do we think about that?
I mean, yeah, though. I mean, I think that Gacy was quoted as saying, how am I antisocial if I'm involved in all these things and I'm involved in politics and stuff like that? But I think that he misses a fundamental definition of what this is, right? So it's like, it's a personality disorder that causes you to be bad in social situations, not to be non-existent in them.
Right.
And by all accounts, he's not good. He's awkward. Like we said earlier, like he would play off his bad behavior. I was just joking. It's not really a big thing. I'm just messing around. And if you do that so many times, it's a pattern, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It seems like this is definitely checking with the way that he was at the time. But the fact that he was, 17 days, I don't know. That seems like a long time to me to be stuck in a, psychiatric evaluation, but I've never had to do one. So maybe I'm wrong. No, am I wrong?
No, that's pretty typical. Cause I think what it really is he is in a basically a treatment center where he is being evaluated by doctors, but at the same time, that's where he
is staying. Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense then. So Gacy would eventually plead guilty to one count of sodomy in relation to Voorhees, but not guilty in relation to the other allegations for other youths. Gacy was sentenced to 10 years in prison. His wife immediately filed for a divorce, and he actually would never see his wife and 2 children ever again, allegedly, which is understandable that she finds this out. This is a horrifying thing for a wife to find out about her husband. So it's not like that's spot on. I would imagine any female would make that choice.
Yeah.
Especially when you have children. I mean, it's a no-brainer. So he quickly grew a reputation in jail as a model inmate. He became the first cook in the prison's kitchen, which was allegedly a prestigious job. He even went as far as to talk the warden into allowing donations from a closing mini golf course, taking the leftover remnants of the golf course to build a recreational area for the inmates. While he was in prison, Gacy's father passed away, and a request to visit his father's funeral was denied. So most of the people that I read interviews from said that during this time when he was around him, after learning that his father died, he was hysterically upset, which, I mean, that's really not any kind of shocking information. It's still his father, whether he's abusive
Regardless
or not.
of the relationship,
right.
Yeah. He could deny all he wants, having these attachments to his father, despite their history. But in the end, I mean,
it's his father.
It's his father.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
So he would eventually be released from prison under conditions of probation, that he moved back to Chicago and live with his mother. Less than a year following his release from jail and his move back to Chicago, he was again charged with sexually assaulting a teenage boy that he had lured from a Greyhound bus terminal. However, the court dismissed this complaint when the boy failed to appear in court. And this is like one of many times that we're probably going to see throughout this story that this guy could have been stopped, right? It could have been the end right there. And it could have been the end after, what we get into later, but it doesn't seem to ever happen. It seems like people are kind of turning a blind eye to this guy. And
does the fact that the kid missed court raise any suspicion? Or do you think that's just, it was a...
raise suspicion as far as, did he make it up?
No, did...
Oh, yeah.
Did
okay.
Gacy have anything to do with it?
I don't know. That's a great question. He definitely has a history of that, obviously, with Voorhees. So It would not shock me at all, but it also wouldn't shock me if the boy just didn't want to talk about it in court, because it's something, you know what I mean?
I mean, the shame of it is that this is why a lot of rape allegations and cases go by the wayside, because the people involved don't want to actually testify. And, that means usually that you can't present all of the evidence. So yeah, this is unfortunately kind of common. Which
is an unfortunate thing that really needs to end. I mean, the stigma of it needs to go away, but Gacy would eventually go on to remarry a mother of 2, who, upon learning of his bisexuality, as well as him constantly bringing boys over to their house and going out into the garage with them, would divorce him. His second wife would find gay pornography, as well as men's wallets and identification inside the house that she couldn't identify, random people's wallets, which is interesting. And we're going to put a pin in that for later, because I want to talk about that. So
Pin placed.
So through his membership at the local Moose Club, Gacy learned of the Jolly Joker Clown Club. And this kind of seems like it's what he's notoriously known for, but I feel like it wasn't a major part of his life. It was just like a thing.
Oh, I agree.
You know what I mean?
I mean, if you everybody knows Gacy, the clown, makeup, the thing that circulated all over the news, but I feel like it was overblown. Yeah. He did this mostly to just go to kids' parties and entertain them. That's what he basically said. And he didn't do it that often. It's not like he actually kind of pretended he was something else to lure people in, not a clown.
Right.
So,
right. Exactly.
Kind of interesting.
So he would eventually join the club and begin performing as a clown at various different local events. The first clown was Pogo the clown, who was the happy clown, and Patches the clown, who according to him, was the more serious character. Around that same time, he also started a part-time construction business and was checked into local politics again. So he was always around local politicians. And I think he was like photographed with the first lady, I think. Is that what it was?
Yeah, and they tried to like play it off that he wasn't even supposed to be at the location, but he actually helped organize it. Like, yeah, that's a weird story too.
Yeah, so I mean, I get why they would want to distance themselves from it and be like, yeah, he totally wasn't supposed to be there. But I guess at the time, like Secret Service gave everyone pins that were allowed to be there, and in the picture, he has one of the pins. So that I think speaks for itself.
I would agree on that one. I think that, once you find out the type of person that this guy is, like, you want to distance yourself. But yeah, he definitely was there, and he was definitely supposed to be there.
Right.
It's not like they didn't know,
Yeah, it's not like he snuck in and got a picture with the first lady. So PDM is the name of his construction business, and the workforce was mostly made up of high school students and young men. And after everything comes out later on, they ask him why he employed, obviously high school
which
students.
is a really weird answer. And I think you were about to say it, but I'm just going to interject.
Go for it.
Because I feel like you're talking, I want to give you a break. But what his answer was when you hire young people like that, you can train them the way you want to do things. And they're not coming in with like these preconceived notions of how they do things. But that's a weird statement, because this guy eventually starts to do remodels for pharmacies and things like that. And like, you need people that are going to do the job well and correctly and fast.
Right.
You don't want people that you have to individually train to do this job. It's a very weird thing to even say, and it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't track with like reality. And it just seems like a lie. Like, watching him even say it in that documentary was kind of like, what? Really?
Absolutely. No. I think it was absolutely an excuse to have the accessibility, to have these kids around him all the time. And you're right. It's having people that are previously trained. Well, one thing, it's going to cost more,
True. Yeah.
You're going to have to pay these people for their whatever limited experience that they do have. These kids, who knows? He could have been, well, actually, I think it said it one of the times one of the kids made like $2 an hour, and then Gacy was going to give him $5 or something like that, $5 an hour.
Yeah.
Which in the 70s was pretty decent.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big increase for a high school student or a young kid. So in May of 1975, Gacy hired 15-year-old high school wrestler. That's important, I promise. Anthony Antonucci. Gacy went to the young man's home when he knew his parents weren't home. The two drank wine and watched stag films before Gacy started jokingly wrestling around with him, before actually wrestling the teen down to the ground and handcuffing him. Gacy left the room for whatever reason, and Anthony was actually able to get one hand free of the handcuffs. When Gacy re-entered, the teen wrestled Gacy to the ground and managed to snag the handcuff key out of Gacy's pocket. He also slapped the handcuffs onto Gacy behind his back. Now, first off, let me say, badass, right?
Dude,
I mean, is this such a cool story?
This is like Born Identity level stuff right here.
Right.
Really
Get it, or like, something, but get out of the handcuffs and go right after him. This is perfect.
Yeah.
And the other thing, because I know, and you guys know this too, I'm sure, and we'll probably get to it, but the whole handcuff thing that Gacy eventually does, I wonder if this is like the whole beginning of that, like an obsession with maybe having a little bit more control. That's weird.
Yeah,
I didn't
definitely.
catch this tie-in until just now.
So it's a cool story. Obviously, the kid saved himself. Gacy is obviously highly upset when he's in these handcuffs, screaming at the boy to let him go. And he eventually calms down and actually talks Anthony into letting him out of the handcuffs and leave the house. So nothing happened of this. Nothing came of this. There were no charges or anything. And he just let him go. Still a cool story, though.
Absolutely.
So These stories, like Ryan said, of Gacy talking teens into handcuffs via saying he's going to show a magic trick or anything, it's peppered all throughout his story and the stuff we're going to get to later. It seemed like his preferred method of getting control of. Gacy would eventually purchase a larger home for him and his mother to live in. Following his second divorce, he moved into the house that would eventually hold the bodies of all his victims. He would use the house as a kind of business front, saying that he had like the dining room was the board meeting room or whatever.
It was just so funny because when we were watching the documentary, he's talking and he's like, yeah, I've got, there's just enough room for me to have my business. And then we just had a, kind of a spare room. So we threw a, whatever he said, like 8x10 meeting conference room table in there. And that's where we host our meetings for the business. That's where we have our conferences. And I'm thinking to myself, and I told Chad, I was like, where's his mom sleeping?
Yeah.
Because the living room is the front office and the lobby. He's got a board meeting room and all these other rooms that he said he has. And I'm like, okay, so his mom's sleeping in the basement, in the attic?
Yeah. At least he's got a
Maybe
board
she's
room.
sleeping in the crawl space.
Oh,
is
zinger. So he would go on to say that at one point there were nearly 20 different house keys out to different employees of PDM. And I want to know what you guys think of this. I think this is not true. I think this is him trying to sow a little bit of doubt into maybe I wasn't the one that did all these horrifying things, because 20 different people had keys to my house. It could have been any of them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It doesn't even, I don't know, it doesn't make sense. Like, why would he give 20 keys out to his house to, kids he barely knew? Like, that doesn't, I don't think so.
Right. So Gacy's early life had all the hallmarks of a serial killer, both mental and physical abuse, sexual assaults, as well as many other early signs that something wasn't right in the man's head. Unfortunately, because of his high standing in society, these warning signs were seemingly ignored. Gacy would often hold block parties. He was always checked into the local politics, and he grew a pretty rapidly growing construction business. But no one really knew what was going on behind closed doors in Gacy's life.
And unfortunately, that's where it gets real dark. And that's where we get into where he kind of went from there. Like we've talked about the fact that he did a lot of kind of illicit things, ended up going to jail, getting psychiatric evaluations for, kind of lewd acts and things like that. But that kind of stuff, as we've talked about, this is a very atypical case of something like this. Like, these stories usually have like a progression, right? So this stuff starts, he's obviously diagnosed as a sociopath. This stuff starts, it gets worse, and then it gets worse, and then he just keeps taking steps down the road a little bit further. And unfortunately, because I'm not going to talk about every single one of them, but if you didn't already know, at the end, it was confirmed that he killed 33 people, which is an unbelievable number. And I believe 26 of them were found in the house that we just discussed. That is crazy. Right. And I don't know, before we get too far in, do you guys know what he said when he was asked why they weren't all in the crawl space?
Oh, yeah. He ran out of room.
Yep. That's just frighteningly horrifying. Anyway, so much like a lot of things that we've already talked about, much like a lot of the events that we've already talked about, his typical way of doing this was to lure these kids to his house. And he would, try to even sometimes get two people at the same time. So he would double up a lot of times on these. Unfortunately, they were typically lured with promises of a job, and we talked about how he would offer $5 when other people were getting $2 an hour, or he would offer drink, drugs, money for sex, like prostitution stuff. So Unfortunately, this was all, from the Greyhound bus station, Bughouse Square, a bunch of areas in, places in the area that he frequented it. And we talked about, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but he didn't pretend to be a clown to lure victims, which I think is what most people think of when they think of Gacy. They think, oh, he probably played a clown to lure in kids. He wasn't luring in that young of a kid. What he actually did was he drove around an Oldsmobile with a spotlight on it, and he would point the spotlight around and people would think he was a cop. So they would get into the car thinking, oh, this policeman is asking me to come with him. That seems legitimate. And that's why they would do it. So that it's kind of unfortunate, but the what is remembered of him and what he actually did are very, very different things.
I didn't know about the spotlight. That's interesting.
Yeah, if you think about it, nobody would get away with that today, right? Because you just call.
Oh,
if you had any suspicions whatsoever, you grab your cell phone, call the police, and be like, "Hey, this guy's trying to." But back then, that wasn't an option. So this was. I feel like this is a relatively common thing you come across for killers or rapists or anything like that. Is they were using this kind of tactic, pulling people over and pretending to be police officers to kind of lower their guard down and then get control of them. So,
well, because now I'm curious if you were 15 years old and you're walking down the street and a cop's got and then you see this spotlight, cop car pulls up, whatever, he was, it's dark, so maybe you don't really notice right away. Like, I feel like at first you're going to be scared, right?
Yeah, most definitely.
What would be, I don't know, I guess I'm trying to put myself in the moment, like if I would do that as a 15-year-old, if I would get in the car, because I assume that this person is telling me that they're a police officer. Not obviously right now, of course I'm not going to do that, but I don't know, I was dumb when I was a kid, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think back then you would have done that. I think we all would have done that.
Right,
At 15 years old, a cop pulls you over, or what you think is a cop, you're going to do what they say. And that's just how we were raised to respect police officers. So, yeah, I think it's back then it was a common tactic, and I completely understand why it was a common tactic, because it probably worked really well.
And I feel like also, even if not all of the people that saw this car with the spotlight and all that stuff where he was pretending to be a policeman, even if not all of them came back because of that, it at least disarms the person that he's trying to talk to before he talks to them about, whatever he could offer them.
Right.
So I think that there might be a little bit of kind of both sides to that, maybe. But then it gets darker, right? Of course it does. Like, you didn't expect that. We talked about the handcuff thing, where, the guy got out of the handcuffs and all that stuff. And I also kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but part of, well, he would say, at least, it was kind of a part of his clowning routine. He would handcuff himself, his own hands behind his back. So he would, when he'd get these people back to his house, he would do this, and then he would actually release himself. And then he would hand the handcuffs over to the person that he's talking to and say, hey, you go ahead and try it. And then they would handcuff themselves, and then they would try to get out, and they couldn't. And then they would ask him, like, what's the trick? And he would say, the trick is you have to have the key, which is some dark stuff to say.
Absolutely.
That is horrible. Like, that is straight out of a horror movie right there.
Yeah, definitely. And just the fact that this seemed like it happened a lot. Like, possibly every single person was in these handcuffs at one point. So it's just,
he did seem to be fond of this.
Yeah, that's like something that I think that I personally wouldn't do if somebody showed me a magic trick. But it's all we're sitting here talking about it. Of course, we're not going to do it now because we know what comes after the handcuffs. But back then, this dude shows you a magic trick and is like, here, I'll show you how to do it. Throw them on real quick. I can again see why this worked so effectively.
And he frequently followed that up by sitting on the victim's chest before forcing the victim to do other things that we won't necessarily discuss. But lots of sex acts. We'll put it that way. So he would also burn them with cigars. He would torture them. He would make them a captive inmate, and he would sit on them as a horse or I'm sorry, he would imitate a horse as he sat on their back and pulled upon a makeshift rein around their neck. I mean, there's so many weird things this guy did. I mean, when you think about the fact that there's 33 victims here, there's a lot of things this guy did. And there's actually an entire 2 paragraphs that I'm not even going to touch. If you want to know more, go read more. It's dark. It's real creepy. But instead of that, I'm just going to get into a couple of the victims that I think are noteworthy. There's ones that kind of tell the story a little bit here. And the first one is Timothy McCoy. So this is Gacy's first known murder, and it was on January 3rd, 1972. According to Gacy's later account, it was following a family party on January 2nd. He drove to the Civic Center, and he was looking at ice sculptures in the early hours of the following morning, and he lured this 16-year-old boy from the Greyhound bus terminal to his car. He was traveling to Omaha, but Gacy took him back and took him on a sightseeing trip of Chicago. By all accounts, Gacy was actually really good at convincing people of things. So I don't totally not understand how this worked. But he actually, then took him back to the station he said he would take him back to the station anyway, to try and catch the bus. But prior to McCoy's identification, the only thing he was really known as was the Greyhound busboy. Gacy claimed he woke early the following morning to find McCoy standing in his bedroom door with a kitchen knife in his hand. So then he jumped from the bed, and McCoy raised both arms in a gesture of surrender, tilting the knife upward and accidentally cutting Gacy's forearm. So he twisted the knife from his wrist, banged his head against the bedroom wall, kicked him into his own wardrobe, and walked towards him. McCoy then kicked Gacy in the stomach, doubling him over. Gacy grabbed McCoy, shouting, "Stuff, and I'll kill you." And then he wrestled McCoy to the ground and stabbed him repeatedly in the chest as he straddled him. So he basically played it off as self-defense, or at least later, right?
Right.
But this was his first kill. This is where it gets really terrible because, again, if you've ever looked at any of these stories, building upon building upon building upon building upon all of these bad things that eventually get to the point where they realize the thing that actually gives them the release they want. Unfortunately, this event and the death of McCoy caused Gacy to realize that the only true release was to kill, and it was the ultimate thrill. And then this is what began the next 32 people, unfortunately.
Right.
Now, there are some noteworthy murders throughout here, but I think it's also important to talk about. The PDM company that he had, and we mentioned it earlier, they were renovating pharmacies in the area, and there was actually a pharmacy right up the road that they were renovating at a certain point as well. So he was doing this for quite a few places. One of the things that he would have his employees do is go under his house and dig these crawl spaces. Now, the crazy thing about this is these crawl spaces were being dug by PDM employees while there were bodies in them. So, take that for what you will. They were instructed to pour, a ridiculous amount of lime into these crawl spaces to try and cover the odor.
Like 800 pounds or something ridiculous like that.
Like an unbelievable amount. I think Gacy tried to play this off, if I remember correctly, as saying that someone in a construction business told him that would be the way to deal with what was it, groundwater or mold?
No, it was clay. The sour clay. Pouring lime on it would sweeten the clay up. I don't know if that's even a thing.
I don't know.
Sounds kind of like it should be, or it is, but when you hear this guy talk, you got to take it with a grain of salt because he's told so many lies over the years. So,
and also when you're talking about 800 pounds of it, that doesn't seem like it's for that same purpose.
Not at all.
But the creepy factor here for me is that a lot of these boys that worked for PDM that would dig these crawl spaces were digging their own graves, and they didn't even really realize it. And you got to wonder how many of them knew what they were doing, because it's not like they couldn't necessarily smell it, or they didn't run into a shoe or something. It just seems odd that they never noticed. You know what I mean?
I don't know. I think maybe Gacy seems like he is a salesman at heart. He's a good salesman. So he's I don't know that they did notice it. I think that he told them they were, digging trenches for piping or whatever, drainage pipes or whatever excuse he made up. And these are 15-year-old kids that probably don't know any better. And the smell thing, he probably played off as, oh yeah, there's, sewage problem down there, or it's the clay or whatever. And again, they're 15-year-old kids. They are probably just going to believe what this guy's telling them. But it is horrifying to think that some of these kids potentially dug their own graves, which is incredible.
Or they know better than to bring it up.
Also true.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Now, like I said, there are 33 total murders here, and I'm not going to go into every single one of them. I think that, for real quick, before I cover this, because I have one major thing I want to talk about. But real quick, I just want to interject. When they got Gacy to talk about these murders finally and got him in a room discussing what he did, the cold, calculated, just very matter-of-fact way that he talked about everything he did, as if it was like, it's a thing, it happened.
Yeah,
right.
Almost as if it wasn't horrifying, is absolutely chilling. And I will tell you, if you go and read about this, even if you just look at the Wikipedia article and you look through the list of some of these people he murdered and what he said he did to them, because he said what he did. It's not like we have victim statements here. Like, this is Gacy saying what he did, right?
Yeah.
If you think about it that way, and you think about like the way this guy's demeanor is, if you look up a video of him, it is striking. Just how dark this is when you start to hear it from that perspective. It's very upsetting.
Right. And I told Alex this before, he looks so normal. You know what I mean? And we could say that about a lot of serial killers, but for whatever reason, this guy is just so basic looking. You know what I mean? Until you hear him talk. And then that's kind of where you get the darkness and the understanding of how he could have done some of this stuff.
No, I totally agree. And that leads me to the last murder. And the reason that I think that this one is really important, I wanted to do bookends. The reason is this is what kicked off the investigation that finally caught Gacy and stopped what he was doing. And it was about time. So on the afternoon of December 11th, 1978, so let's just paint that picture real quick. This all started in January 1975. We are now in December 1978. That's a long time for someone to be able to do this and have this many victims in a suburban neighborhood, who was involved in politics and had his own company working out of the house where he was keeping the bodies.
Yep. Literally right under everybody's noses, he was doing this stuff.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So December 11th, 1978, Gacy went to the Nissan Pharmacy, which was in Des Plaines, which, by the way, I always thought was Des Plaines, but it's Des Plaines.
I thought it was
the
too.
area.
Yeah.
It's just weird because Des Moines,
right?
Des Moines. That's what it looks like. But
yeah,
Des Moines.
I'm gonna say Des Moines from now on.
That sounds really official.
Des Moines.
It sounds like the name of like an 80s hair metal singer. Hey, I'm Des Moines from Cricket Killer. Yeah. Anyway, so he went to this pharmacy. What's that?
Sorry, I was saying, and they have a violinist,
but it's an electric violin, and it's plugged into like an 8-stack high Marshall amp.
Absolutely.
Perfect. It'll be great. I'm sure it won't blow anyone's eardrums. Don't hit that high note. So he goes to this pharmacy to discuss a potential remodeling deal with the owner. Now, while he was within, by the way, this is the one that's like up the road from where he lives. So while he's within earshot, there's a 15-year-old part-time employer named Robert Peast. Gary mentioned his firm often hired teenage boys starting at $5 an hour, almost double the pay that Peast earned at the pharmacy, and we've talked about that before. So, shortly after he left the pharmacy, Peast's mother arrived to the store to drive her son home, so that the family could celebrate her birthday together. So it was actually his mom's birthday. Peast asked his mother to wait, adding that a contractor wanted to talk to him about a job. left the store at 9 p.m., promising to return shortly. Unfortunately, that never happened. Peace was murdered just after 10 p.m. at Gacy's house. Gacy later stated that at his house, he asked Peace whether there was anything he wouldn't do for the right price, to which Peace replied that he did not mind working hard. In response, Gacy said good money could be earned by hustling, although Peace was dismissive. Gacy then duped Peace into donning the handcuffs, just like we talked about. And then he said, "I'm going to rape you, and you can't do anything about it," as Peace began weeping. This is told by Gacy. Reminder, this is coming from Gacy. He also stated that he placed the rope around Peace's neck. The boy was crying and scared. Gacy admitted to having received a phone call from a business acquaintance as Peace lay dying, suffocating on his bedroom floor. He took a phone call.
Yeah.
This man took a phone call, and he killed this boy within an hour of him leaving work, tortured him, and did all this to him, and took a phone call.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
this is the dangerous human being that we're talking about.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a little insane to think about. And the rope thing that Ryan is kind of talking about, I don't know if he's going to touch on it, so I'm going to touch on it. It was apparently something he used pretty frequently. Same with the handcuffs, and it was basically made like a like a tourniquet to go around the neck. So it was a rope with 2 knots on it that he put a stick in between that he would twist, and it would either cause you to suffocate or, I guess, just suffocate is the best way. I guess it's not going to cause anything else but that. But it's basically a tourniquet that he could twist and twist and twist. So he twists it, leaves this guy on the ground suffocating, and goes and takes a phone call, which is horrifying.
Watching him describe that was him describing like killing a deer.
Yeah, totally normal. Totally normal.
It was so, I think that was one of the more eerie moments for me watching that, because he just so plainly talks about killing another human being.
Yeah, like it's nothing.
Like it's literally hunting game.
Yep.
So it's just so odd.
So that leads into kind of the next piece here. Unfortunately, obviously, this young man did not return to his family. So they filed a missing persons report, clearly, as they would. Now, the owner of that pharmacy named Gacy as the contractor that Peace had gone to meet with. And, of course, they went to Gacy's house. Gacy denied any involvement in this. And but during looking all this up, they also did a criminal background check of Gacy, which uncovered the outstanding battery charge against him in Chicago and uncovered the fact that he had served a prison sentence in Iowa for what he did with that 15-year-old boy. So they went and talked to him and still denied everything, said he left the pharmacy shortly after 8, which was, around the time of his appointment, and then said, I had nothing to do with it. And also they asked him to come down to the police station. He responded, "You guys are very rude. Don't you have any respect for the dead?" Which is weird. And a lot of very strange behavior here. So all of this, like this entire thing, this was like Gacy finally making a mistake. In all the things he had done, he had finally made a mistake. He had, within earshot of other people, discussed this with this boy who then went missing. 33 in, I guess he got lazy.
Or people were just paying attention this time.
Finally.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Because it seems like if you read some of these cases, it seems like this should have been stopped at 12 or 7 or, far before he got to this point. So it's either one of two things. Either, like Ryan said, he made a mistake, or people were just paying attention this time and were able to, catch a hint of this guy.
Absolutely. And I think that basically leads us right into the investigation. So Gacy's tipped his hand, and now the police are actually really paying attention. So I think, Alex, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yes. So a lot of people criticize this case because of the investigative process. So Gacy got away with a lot of stuff, and there's two sides to it. One side, you can say that he was a connected individual. He had a lot of friends, some in high places, and throughout his political, if you want to call it his political career, campaign, whatever, he was able to make a lot of friends. But that's not the only argument here. And I'm actually going to focus on the other side of it, because a lot of what you hear is that he was able to, kind of snuff out some of this stuff through those vehicles of information, like I said. So what I'm going to talk about is the actual individuals that were a part of the investigation. So one thing that I don't know if we really mentioned or focused on is the fact that the majority of the investigation, especially in the early times, so this in total went from, let's see, what years, 1972 to 1978. Is that when the official investigation started?
Yeah, 1978.
Yeah,
it would have been December of, yep.
So it didn't start off with FBI, CIA, like it was the workhorses. It was the police officers were doing these investigations and looking into these things and tracking him down and stuff like that. And eventually FBI got involved. But in the beginning, it was majorly the police force. So I actually found an article that I really, really liked. And one of the big things that they talk about, sorry, I'm like, my allergies. One of the big things that they talk about are the fact that these guys weren't experienced enough with serial killers to know exactly what to look for. And I mean, I feel like that's something we could probably agree with.
Yeah, I mean it's little town Iowa. So it's not like they're in LA or New York or any of the bigger cities that are heavily trained in this stuff.
And I mean, at this time, the idea of a serial killer was like, I mean, the idea existed, but it wasn't really a well-established thing by this point.
Absolutely. So this was something that was led primarily by the police force. So that was one of the most difficult points for law enforcement with investigating serial killers in general, but in this case, believing the same things that you and I are. So if people are saying, the same misconceptions, if people are saying that he's this person, because we said he looks so normal, he's a relatively social person, which is against the MO, so to speak, of a serial killer.
Right.
Or it's against that profile. So law enforcement can get wrapped up in that as well, and it's what happened. Basically, they're able to do their job, but at the same time, they're these stereotypes that we see can lead them into the wrong direction. So this whole time, they're looking for somebody that's really not the same profile as John Wayne Gacy. So between 1972 and 1978, Gacy, like we said, he raped, tortured, and killed 33 young men, and that was through the FBI that they eventually named that. And the reason he was allowed to continue to do this was because that the police, like I said, they were looking for somebody else, and they didn't have the means to identify a serial killer. Most of the time they were, they didn't have the, like cameras and stuff like that you were able to kind of see exactly what's going on at all times. Obviously, they didn't have tracking and things like that because, you know, he's saying he's one place and not the other or whatever. So, what did you guys think about the investigation in terms of, do you think that the police were kind of being bought in a way?
Well, there is one thing that I think about with the whole investigation, and that is one thing, like, I don't know how much you were going to get into this, so I apologize if I'm kind of blowing something for you, but I really think it's important to talk about the way they did surveillance on this guy.
That's kind of what I meant, yeah, with the surveillance and the cameras and stuff.
It's so weird. And like, I mean, if you, dear listener, don't know this already, the surveillance that they did on Gacy after they started to kind of suspect him was a little weird. They would follow him around. Gacy, being a very manipulative person, knew that they were following him. It wasn't like they were really good at hiding it or anything. Eventually, they were following around to these different places. They eventually started following him into bars and into restaurants. He would buy them drinks. They would buy him drinks. Like, this is the most unprofessional surveillance that you can possibly think of. And, you know, at a certain point, he's even inviting them in so that he can cook for them. And
eventually turned into like a mutual friendship where I think that Gacy was manipulating them, and that's kind of like I was saying in the beginning, is even so, these officers, they were entirely manipulated. The judicial system was manipulated at one point. So it was something that really got out of hand quickly. And I think that another thing was, well, I'll let you finish and then I'll continue. Go ahead.
Oh, you're good. I mean, I agree with you. I think it started here. Like, obviously, we already know, and if you followed any of this, you've kind of already figured it out. Gacy's very manipulative. This is just something that he does. He begins to manipulate these officers that are surveilling him. He eventually, you know, way down the line, manipulates his own lawyers. He manipulates prosecutors. He manipulates, like you said, stops with. And, you know, there are different ways that he goes about doing this, and all are in service of either making himself look less guilty or giving himself an easier way out of the situation that he's brought himself into. And Chad mentioned this earlier. He'll admit to something and then he'll retract it. It's a constant back and forth with this guy, and you know, you never know if what he's saying is true, except for the things that you can verify with actual evidence, right? So yeah. It's a difficult situation to be in, I think.
So I want to touch on the police thing real quick, because I think that it could maybe go a different way than what you guys are going. I do believe that he was manipulative. I'm not denying that fact at all. However, for surveillance in the 70s, these guys are probably sitting out of his house, sitting outside of restaurants, not getting anything whatsoever. There's no better way to get to know the guy that they're chasing than to sit at his kitchen table and eat dinner with him. So you're right. You know what I mean? So while we might think that he was manipulating the police officers, this might have been a legitimate strategy to get more information on this guy.
And I don't know, can we mention real quick, like, how he was finally, like, caught? Just real quick while we're on the topic.
Yeah, go for it.
Because this whole strategy that Gacy tried to play here, where he was buddy with the cops and trying to, like, you know, pal up the surveillance people and buy them drinks, yeah, that backfired. You know, he invites these guys in, and they're sitting in his kitchen. One of them goes to the restroom. The heat kicks on. He smells something, and guess what? I mean, like, it couldn't have possibly gone worse,
right,
in that exact moment. And Gacy did it to himself. He was trying to manipulate these guys, and look what happened.
Yeah, it was almost like he almost got cocky with that.
And that seems to be that seems to be a frequent thing of every serial killer that we talk about. They eventually get really cocky, because whether it's Zodiac taunting the police, or there's always some point that they get cocky, and that's usually what leads to their downfall. But it
If
seems
only
to be a
Zodiac
thing.
did have a downfall.
Right.
If only
True.
he had gotten caught.
True. Yeah. True.
So another thing that I want to touch on is what really happened with the media during this investigation. A lot of, and there's really, it's kind of a what it's called. It's the talking head syndrome. Basically, is you get the media will focus on whoever is essentially talking the loudest, despite their true credibility. And it can be an amount of credibility that they're giving themselves, and then the media backs that up. So it's this a situation where, let's just say, there's somebody that says, I'm an expert in this, and they may be, but then they're going to lead the PR stunt of saying John Wayne Gacy is this criteria, and this is who we need to be looking for. And then the media writes it down, and they say, okay, this is who we're looking for now. And then that is the story. So that's exactly what happened. So from that point, they immediately profile, which is essentially that serial killers are all dysfunctional loners. Serial killers are all white males motivated by sex. That serial killer murderers or serial murderers travel and operate via interstate. That they can't stop killing. That they're insane or evil geniuses. And that eventually they want to get caught. And that's through the Department of Justice. And
I just wanted to real quick, just interject something. I think that a large problem with why like you said, the talking head thing, why that's such an issue is that, all these organizations are in the service of trying to get the story out first. They're not taking the time to vet the source, and they're saying, okay, this is good news. And they're just going to put it out,
Yep.
and it's a lot of people not fact checking. And then when you don't fact check, you end up with this stuff. And even at a certain point, just to really hammer home that point for you, I think that this is a really important thing. At a certain point, one of the, I can't remember if it was a psychologist or not, but they went in to interview Gacy, and they sat down, they said, we want to talk to you. And Gacy responded with, well, who do you want to talk to? The businessman, I forget, he said 3 or 4 different things.
Yeah.
So the next day in the news, they were reporting that he had multiple personality disorder. Yeah. That's not the case at all. He was just saying, do you want to talk to the professional guy? Do you want to talk to the family guy? Or do you want to talk to the clown? That's what he was saying.
Right.
And he was just making an off comment. And that's weird. That should never have hit the news the next day, first of all.
Sure.
And also just not accurate. It wasn't a psychological evaluation. It was just him saying a dumb thing. It's
but news is not about accuracy ever. So you nailed it. It's about getting the word out first. So especially back then,
So I guess all in all, despite the lack of resources that the police force had, especially in the 70s, in summary, they did a relatively decent job. What they could have done better is they could have had the immediate organization that would have been required. And now is a whole new process. There's whole new policies and procedures that go into it now that they didn't have then. But to get the FBI in right away, and that's the thing is local police forces, when they get something like this, no, they're not used to it. You don't get a serial killer every day. But what's the one thing they want to do is they want to investigate murders. So they're not going to call another jurisdiction to come in and run the show. But that's what needs to be done, because those resources and those and that level of expertise is what's required in order to have an efficient investigation.
I want it to seem like they're incompetent and that
Absolutely.
they need the assistance of somebody else.
Yeah.
And I get that. However, it does need to end because we're trying to catch terrible people here. Shouldn't be about bragging rights and being the big name in the newspaper. It should be about catching the people and giving closure to the victims' families.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's just, it tells the tale of somebody doing their job. It's you break away from the emotional aspect of it, which is a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. It disconnects you from what the real end result should be, which is what you said, giving families closure, being able to serve justice to the appropriate people, and like I said, making the job as efficient as it can be. But
right.
Yeah, a lot of people, there's a lot of things that went wrong with it, but there's also a lot of things that went right. Through those manipulative efforts of Gacy, they were able to gain really unprecedented access to him at all, because in what other situation, without getting a warrant, which they eventually did, but without initially getting a warrant and forcing yourself in, will you be able to sit down and have dinner with the guy that you're investigating?
Right. So yeah, like I said, it could sound like that they were being manipulative, but that it might have been 100% their plan. They're not getting anything sitting in the car out in the cold. So let's, whatever, man, let's let this guy buy a drink and talk a little bit. Maybe he slips up.
Right. So the, yeah, I mean, that's all I got for the investigation. Really, in summary, like I said, it's just, they did the best they could, and they didn't do, they did a good job. They obviously caught the guy.
Right.
But despite the fact that there's tons of controversy around the way that it went in the case, it's like, it's hard to say because we weren't there.
Yeah, so, true. So go ahead, Ryan.
I was just going to say, and this all comes to a head. They start to pull out all the bodies. They tear down the house. There's even news footage showing like the crawl space as they've torn down like all the foundation, and showing all the orange markings where they found bodies, and it's all very distressing to watch. And what I found interesting here was, we mentioned earlier, he started throwing bodies in the river, and it just so happened that Peace's body was in the river as well. And we said earlier too, they started this investigation in the dead of winter, right in the middle of December. So the river was frozen over, which means that, pulling this body out was highly unlikely. I found it kind of interesting, at least, that, during the whole trial, during, trying to get all these bodies out and trying to name, by the way, a lot of these children they weren't named even during the trial.
Right.
While Gacy's sitting there facing 33 murders, some of these people, they didn't even know who they were. And they're still trying to find Robert Peace's body. And eventually they were able to do so. And just the like, I mean, you've got to imagine, like, there's a little bit of poetic justice here, I guess. The last body found is the one that really sealed it for him. And
right.
I thought that was kind of interesting, but yeah, it's a really dark story. And we mentioned earlier the manipulation, and, one thing that did happen, he convinced a lot of people that he was insane, and they went for an insanity plea. And then they even found, highlights in books that were owned by Gacy about insanity, defense. And, it's just manipulation all the way down. He wasn't insane. He's just a very sick individual that did very horrible things.
Right. It was just his way of prepping himself for when he got caught. You know what I mean? He's doing his research on the insanity plea. And I think that it was kind of interesting when you hear about, I think the cops like went down into that crawl space weeks prior to finding bodies down there, and figuring that there was nothing down there because there's no mounds of dirt or anything. And then Gacy gets arrested, confesses to everything, and even draws out a map of where all the bodies are down in there. Okay. And it's pretty accurate. I mean, almost spot on with where they found the bodies at. But then he later claims that he only murdered one person. It's that first guy that he claimed self-defense against that we talked about. And he never, he couldn't get down there to, I don't know. I find it weird that this guy potentially didn't have any accomplices. But the reason for that is maybe because of the lies that he's telling. So he tells that he sends these teens down there to dig the hole because he can't get down in there to do it because he's got a bad back or whatever the excuse was. But then he got bodies down in there and moved the bodies down through there. So I don't know, like at first I was like, it's just one sick dude doing all this. But the more you think about it, I feel like the two kids that they thought could potentially have known what was going on and potentially buried some of those bodies. I think I lean a little bit more towards that being true, just from the fact that that's a lot of work for one dude to do. You know what I mean? One out of shape dude. And the opening to the crawl space was not very big by the pictures.
Very small.
So, and he's not a small guy. This isn't a, 120-pound dude we're talking about. So,
they should
I don't know.
Try to fit in there.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's like but
that's O.J. Simpson.
Like, I was just gonna say, if it doesn't fit, you must have quit. So,
it's a shame that guy wasn't the what was that lawyer's name?
Oh yeah, Johnny Cochran.
Johnny Cochran,
yeah.
And to even also point out a little bit more manipulation here, he drew this map and then said someone else drew it to
different
also
name.
Yeah, like that. It was Jack something.
It's all a play, man. It's all a play. He's trying to find his defense, and I don't buy any of the multiple personality things. I don't buy majority of the stuff that he says because he's lied so many times before. He confesses to all the murders, draws detailed diagrams, and then later says, "No, I only killed one person. It must have been one of the guys that had a key to my house that did all of this." And they're just putting it on me because they found the bodies in my house. But I do want to pull that pin out that we put in earlier, which were the wallets and identifications of random guys that his second wife had found. Do you think his kill count is significantly higher than what it actually is reported to be? Yes. And were those wallets of victims that he kept as memorabilia or whatever you want to say?
I could easily believe either side of this, but I could see the argument that, maybe he kept the wallets of people that he, did things with. And, maybe that's what happened. And it wasn't until the death of that he realized that death was a thing that he liked. But I could also see, that his kill count's more like 60 or 70. And that, those were victims, but, nobody ever found them either. They even looked at like the apartment building that his mom stayed at a certain point. They never found anything. So, I mean, it's been a while. So I don't know. It could be either way, honestly, on that one.
Yeah. I think that he said in an interview, somebody asked him if the 33 were the only ones. And he said, I think 45 would be a good number, which he later recanted, obviously, like he does everything else.
Yeah,
I gotta think that there's more out there, man. There's just just seems like it to me that he was doing this far before that first kill that he allegedly, did in self-defense.
Well, and not only that, but when he was younger too.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
like much younger. I mean, just entering, his adulthood, there were a lot of opportunities where he was around children. I mean, when he was clowning, I'm sure, when he first started, what was his true reasoning for wanting to get into that?
Right. Yeah, it's true. It's a little out of the demographic age wise, the boys that he would be dealing with that, but it wouldn't shock me if 5 years down the road we find out that he had younger victims too.
Sure. Yeah.
I think
and then that brings us to sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say that brings us to 1980 when he's convicted and they schedule the execution, which didn't happen until 1994. And I just thought that this was worth talking about real quick. He had his final last meal, which was a bucket of KFC, a dozen fried shrimp, French fries, fresh strawberries, and a Diet Coke. That's all right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so then I thought this was interesting. So before the execution began, the chemicals used to affect to actually do the execution, they solidified kind of unexpectedly. So they clogged the IV tube that was used to administer the chemicals to Gacy, which complicated everything. So blinds covering the windows through, that the witnesses were watching through, they were dropped. And the execution team replaced the clogged tube. And after 10 minutes, the blinds were reopened, the execution resumed, and the entire procedure took 18 minutes, which they blamed on the jail staff not really knowing how to do things.
Yeah.
So what a crazy end.
Yeah, I think they
yeah.
said that he effectively suffocated, that the medication somehow didn't work the way it was supposed to. And I think this might be me being dark, but I think it's a fitting ending to the story, personally. And I'm sure all the parents of those kids probably feel the same exact way.
Yeah, there were interviews with some of the parents that went to actually watch, and yeah, you're not wrong.
So here's something interesting. John Wayne Gacy is on the top 20 list of most bizarre last meal requests on death row. He's number 17.
It doesn't surprise me. What's number one? Now I gotta know.
You guys want to know number one?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right, so number one is James Edward Smith. In 1990, when he got his final meal request, all he wanted was a pile of dirt.
That was
Did he then
that was
eat the
so
dirt?
That was so disappointing.
He ate a pile of dirt.
So is it
two?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, here's number
Let's do it.
two. Robert, yeah, this is totally new episode now. Robert Dale Conklin, his death sentence in 2005 was he wanted a filet mignon wrapped in bacon, deveined shrimp sauteed in garlic butter with lemon, baked potato with sour cream, chives, and real bacon bits, not from the bag. Corn on the cob, asparagus with hollandaise sauce, French bread with butter, goat cheese, cantaloupe, vanilla bean ice cream, and an iced tea.
My goodness.
Did they give it to him?
That's a high-end final request there, man. That was a couple $100 probably. So go ahead.
No,
And then I have a question.
The article says, unfortunately, his sophisticated taste did not match the nature of his crimes as he killed his gay lover with a screwdriver to the ear.
Oh my God.
Wow.
So,
All right.
Wow.
Alrighty. Anyway.
I mean, honestly, as you were reading that meal, I was like, that sounds good.
Yeah, it sounds really good.
Yeah.
Can't blame him. So is the final meal thing, is that like just anything they request they get?
For the most part, yeah. I think
Yeah.
I think unless it's something they definitely can't get for him, then I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would imagine it's really anything you want. I mean, it is going to be your last meal. I don't know. I kind of like, that's such a weird tradition to me. Because
it is, but I mean, I guess I get it. You know?
Like, I guess they're about to take your life, so
Yeah.
give you
I mean,
one
you're
last
dying.
meal.
We'll let you eat some bacon wrapped filet and some deveined shrimp and garlic butter.
So I think we've reached the end. Would you say so?
have.
All right.
I would. Hey, Ryan.
Hey,
you
Alex.
You want to give one of them fancy social shout outs to our lovely watchers
Sure.
and listeners
Yeah.
here?
Well, if you enjoyed this podcast, let me tell you, you will also enjoy other things stuff. No, I'm just kidding. That's strange.net. That's where you can find everything that has anything to do with us, and links to all of our social media and our blog. That, I just want to say that Chad takes a lovely amount of time perfectly crafting, cooking just to perfection, getting just a little bit of pink throughout. That juicy filet mignon that I now want
I know.
of a blog.
I know, right? It
Now-
sounds
now
so
we're
good.
just starving.
Yeah, I really want a filet mignon. And wrapped in bacon doesn't sound terrible either, but
No,
filet
it
mignon,
doesn't.
yes, I'll go with that. But yeah, no, please head on over there. Make sure to give us a follow and subscribe, or I guess now follow our podcast in Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And we would really appreciate it. And also, just because I like to say this every now and then, if you have an idea for some real crazy weird thing that you think those boys over at That Strange would enjoy reading about this, we probably would. So send it to contact@thatstrange.net, and then we will put it in the pile of topics. And you, dear listener, may be thanked for that topic at a later date when we record it. And we'd really appreciate it. So thank you.
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. And once again, thank you to Panic Fest, everyone at Downright Creepy. It's a awesome community, and they also have a Facebook group. And I believe it's on Facebook. It's a Facebook group.
You think that the Facebook group is on Facebook? I think
think.
you're right.
That's a good assumption.
I think it's on Facebook.
So not Twitter.
No.
Right.
I don't think they have like Pinterest or anything. They should really get with the times.
I
But,
mean, they should really get a MySpace at this point.
I mean, why don't they have a TikTok?
They should probably have a TikTok.
It's really
Everybody
not
should
that.
have a TikTok. I don't have a TikTok, but
What
you
happened
guys
to
should have a TikTok.
Foursquare?
Foursquare stopped when everyone realized that location tracking is creepy.
Yeah, but
I thought Foursquare was like a website.
No, Foursquare was
Builder.
a thing where Foursquare was the thing where you like check in at places that you were visiting so that you could become like the mayor of that area and just like
Yeah.
keep track of all the places. Yeah. That.
Yeah.
That was
what a-
such a great. Speaking of manipulation, that was such a great way to say, "Hey, no, forget about the fact that we're tracking this for data for
Yeah.
for we're not stealing your data. We promise."
Yeah. Such an elegant way of putting it. Hey, you
we
could be the
care about your
mayor
privacy.
of your local Dairy Queen.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
This
Blizzards
reminds me-
still that you have to pay for full price.
Among one of the
reminds me
best
of
sales
another-
pitches.
Oh, absolutely. Have you guys ever heard of Earth 2.0?
Yes.
No.
Okay. So
Is
get
this like Second Life?
no.
No.
It's
Okay.
more like virtual real estate. So Earth 2.0.
Oh, it's NFTs. I know it. It's NFTs. No? Okay.
It is, what's NFT?
Oh,
It's like the
non-fungible token.
Natural futural phenomenon.
No,
Yes,
it's
that's it.
It's a
NFT.
cryptocurrency thing where you can sell pictures of stuff. It's weird, and I
It's
don't know
really
why
weird,
a
but
thing.
it's funny. My cousin was just telling me about this at Easter. It's so funny that you're talking about this right now. It basically allows you to like make authentic internet art and make it like the first official copy by putting one of these coins on it or something like that. I
What?
don't know. It's really bizarre. It's a cryptocurrency.
Dude,
thing.
Jack Dorsey sold his original like first tweet on Twitter as an NFT, and someone I think paid like $88,000 for it, or
Yep.
88,000 in Bitcoin, I think.
Yeah.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
It's real weird. It's real weird. But so a lot of things
So,
with cryptocurrency are
Here's
weird.
the second craziest thing. Earth 2.0 is a virtual, completely like accurate model of the Earth. So it's basically they threw Google Maps on some sort of platform where you can buy plots of land virtually for when they claim that that humanity will be completely VR. So the market when this thing launched was so low that people were like, yeah, sure, why not? I'll buy my land for 13 cents on the dollar or something like that. And people actually started making so much money after it went viral that they were selling their land and making real money from selling this
So
square on Google Maps.
So it allows you to own a piece of property in a game, you're saying, in a VR scenario? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's not even a platform yet. They're saying that when
When it becomes.
it becomes a thing, you'll already have property owned.
Huh. Interesting. Very bizarre.
And Ryan just sent it to the group, so we can always count on Ryan.
It's true. He's very quick
I'm
with that.
really good at Google. That's
Yes.
He's such a good Googler.
all. I've been looking
Yes.
at the prices of some of this stuff. It's very interesting. It's weird.
Oh yeah, and if you're thinking about it, don't do it.
I'm not gonna. But
Because
like, it's weird though.
it's absolutely weird. It's strange even. Speaking of strange, we're that strange. Oh wait, I gotta do the rest.
Yeah, you did that wrong.
Okay. Anyway,
Or did you do it more right than you've ever done it?
Ooh.
it could have been the most rightest thing I've ever done.
It could have been. It could have been the best attempt at a good thing that you've ever attempted to be good at.
And I would say it was great.
And I would say it was subpar.
So
Oh.
if you were able to tolerate this,
kidding. I'm kidding.
if you were able to tolerate this subpar attempt at making a podcast, again, look us up. I'm Alex.
I'm Chad.
And I'm Ryan, soon to be fired from.
From the nonprofit known as. And we are That's Strange. Goodbye.
You're listening to a Downright Creepy original on the Crickets Podcast Network.
Welcome to That's Strange, where we dive deep into the internet, uncovering